Hi, everybody. I'm Ramon Mateo, and I'm partner and director of analysis and regulatory impact at Bartlett. And well, as you see, Europe is facing an ecological transition. And you have seen before one field in which we have consensus, energy. I will talk to you about another field which have more division, that is mobility. Let me show you with some data. As you can see, we ask if Europeans support investment in public transport. It's important, even if it requires a tax increase. And you can see that 65% of Europeans agree with that objective. But at the same time, we ask about the ban on petrol cars, which you know is fixed in 2035. And you can see that 58% of Europeans oppose the ban. So one of the conclusions we can take from the data is that people in Europe agree on the objective. Even they agree it could entail more cost to take, but they don't agree to assume personally the sacrifice it requires. So maybe that is a call to action for public decision makers. You can also see that this position is consistent across all the states we analyze in both policies. And maybe you can think that this is a question of partisanship, maybe a question of country, social. Well, you can see you have here an important political gap. In fact, an astonishing fact is that this gap is the biggest gap we found in our poll. You can see there, 93% of green voters in Germany support the ban on petrol cars, but only 1% of AfD voters support it. And you can think this is some party or political family issue, but you can also see that, for example, in France, La France Insoumise voters, 70% oppose the ban. While, for example, in Podemos, 80% support it. So maybe there is a deeper phenomena, deeper sociological phenomena. Two more things. Apart from that is the most important. We also ask for Chinese electric vehicles. We ask if Europeans see as an opportunity or a threat. And you can see there is also a divided views. In some countries, they see more like an opportunity, and others a threat. But both sides have a strong position. And another question we ask is about autonomous vehicles. And as you can see, we ask if Europeans are comfortable or not with the autonomous vehicle, and we see that 57% still feel uncomfortable, which could be reasonable given it's a disruptive technology, but we'll see in the future. That's all. Now I let you with Jan Chensky of Politico and the rest of the speakers. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for those insights into our poll. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jan Chensky. I'm Politico's senior policy editor, and one of the areas I'm in charge of is mobility and transport policy. And in today's panel, we're really going to be digging into the future of the European car industry, which is a very big subject for half an hour. 7% of the EU's GDP, 13 million jobs, but facing huge problems with American tariffs under Donald Trump, sputtering transition to EVs, and rising competition from China. So for this panel, I'd like to welcome Dolores Montserrat, who's the Secretary General of the European People's Party and a member of the European Parliament. Welcome. Mark Rosendahl, who's the CEO of EIT Urban Mobility. Over a little bit. Agnes Schunemar, who is the Associate Professor at the University of Budapest's Institute of Global Studies. And at the end, we have Sander Salmu, Deputy Secretary General for Mobility at the Estonian Ministry for Environment. I'd like to begin with what we saw in the poll results, and one that really jumped out at me was that the polls show a strong majority in favor of keeping combustion engine cars, which is at stark variance with the EU's drive to end the sale of combustion engine cars or CO2 emitting cars by 2035. However, when you contrast that view with sales data, you can see that the sales of diesel and gasoline engine cars are collapsing, and the sales of EVs and hybrid cars are rising very rapidly, so it doesn't quite seem to match. I'd like to begin with Dolores. Your party strongly backs a revamp of the 2035 EU law. Why is that? Are you sort of backing yesterday's technology here?
No. Look, EPP is agree with the majority of the European citizens. In the last term, we voted against this ban of the combustion engine, and we lost for just 7 votes. And now in this term, we are the ones that we are leading to maintain the combustion engine in Europe. Because, look, fight against the climate change, we can do it, of course, but never against the industry. And I think, and I'm going to be honest, first, the automotive sector in Europe, you were explaining 7% of the GDP. Here in Spain, 10% of the GDP. In Europe, 14 millions of jobs in automotive sector. In Spain, 2 millions, because automotive sector is the second economic sector in Spain. So let's be honest. I think that, the Green Deal that was led by Timmermans, Vice President in the Commission, Socialists, Netherlands, was not a climate plan. It was, for me, a deindustrialization plan. And now we have a sector with a crisis and without predictable legal framework. So what we are doing, EPP, now in the European Parliament, the same that we did last term. We believe in the freedom on innovation. I think that we can share in our market to have electric cars, hybrid, combustion engine, but sustainable combustion engine, and then, leave the freedom to the citizens to choose all these cars. Now, the problem is that the society, they don't know what they have to buy. So we have to give predictability in the legal framework, and EPP is proposing this predictability, that we are going to have all different kinds of cars in Europe, and then, the people will choose. I think that, we have to have a constructive dialogue with the sector. We did. Then we have to invest and defend and protect them, of course. And then, of course, we have to invest in Europe, and we have to put it easy. How? Less bureaucracy, more flexibility, not to put so much burdens that are putting a lot of cost to the industry.
That's a good point about predictability. Aren't you actually undermining predictability? The EU, in a very fraught and convoluted process, agreed 2 years ago on the 2035 phase-out. That's the rules. Car makers like Volvo say, okay, fair enough, this is the rule, we're setting for that. And now, thanks to political and industrial pressure, the EU is revamping that rule. Volvo is furious that they've made these investments, they think this is the track, and now potentially it could change. So aren't you actually undermining the predictability by putting in these last-minute changes?
This is the reason that we are doing a constructive dialogue with all the industry, and it is true that now in this semester, this package is already in the Parliament, and we are going to, I'm sure that we are going to have a good solution. For who? For the industry, because we want this industry to lead in the world, the automotive sector. Second, we want that the consumers, that are all the European citizens, to have the freedom to choose, which car sustainable they will go to buy. And third, of course, the next generation funds, for example, they have to be used to put infrastructure. Because I have to say to you that, for example, here in Spain, we just start to have a plan of batteries in Sagunto, now, in a few months in Aragon. But then, if you are looking the data, Spain is behind a lot of the European countries. We don't have the electric charges in our cities.
No,
so
that is a complaint.
You are pushing all the people to buy electric 100% cars, but then you are not putting as a government the infrastructure. So we have to manage all of this, and I think that EPP will deliver because we have the clear ideas about this issue.
Mark, are you as optimistic that that this makes sense to reopen an issue that had actually been settled a couple of years ago? And is there a danger that, I get the argument from the incumbent car industry that this is a technology which Europe dominated for a century or more. It makes sense to try to hang on to that. But if you look at sales, especially in non-European markets, Morocco, Brazil, Thailand, they're going electric very fast. Is Europe potentially isolating itself by not moving aggressively in the same direction that the Chinese are?
I think your first comment was that the sales figures show that the uptake to electric is good. I'm part of EIT Urban Mobility, want to drive the sustainable mobility transition in cities. So one thing is, it is good that customers decide themselves to change from ICE towards an electric vehicle. But just replacing a car by itself is not sufficient enough. We work with over 220 cities already in Europe, and they face a huge challenge, right? 70% of the population is already living in urban areas, expected to grow towards 50%, towards 80% in 2050. That means just replacing cars by cars is not the solution here. We have talked for decades now about creating the model shift. The model shift is important, so you need to provide, as cities and society at large, a proper alternative, stepping away and moving away from cars.
So a more radical rethink than, as you said, rethinking powertrains, but rethinking the whole concept of
yes.
mobility.
We talk a lot about innovation within Europe, but we talk mostly about innovation in product, services, and new technologies, which we are, by the way, pretty amazing in. But the systemic innovation that is needed across the board, also from policy perspective and innovation procurement perspective, that needs to change radically. And I'm convinced that with new technologies like AI, quantum, and later on probably we will talk about autonomous vehicle, technology can help us, can help cities, can help urban planners to move away from car-centric design towards more people-centric design. Just more cars on the road means more congestion in the cities. That is not the solution for the full problem that we as a society face.
Is that not, I did sort of quote at the beginning the data of the weight of the car industry for the European economy. Are you not endangering that by that sort of a radical rethink that, I guess, cycling, buses, very green approach, but then you end up wrecking 13 million jobs. Is that not a danger?
Yeah, but it's not something from today, this discussion, right?
Okay.
This has evolved over time, and it is the position that you take as a car industry. Am I against the car industry? Definitely not. But moving with new technology, new initiatives, and also looking ahead what is happening in the global market and make sure that we in Europe are better in innovation, and not just innovation at the early stage, but scaling it up towards the benefit of society. Not just the benefit for having the industry, and it is of course important to protect the jobs, but the jobs will remain depending on what the industry will look like in the future. But have the eyes open, the fact that we are dominated by other continents into Europe with competitiveness, we should be able to do better as Europe. And I'm happy to at least see, I'm a part of the urban mobility market. It's not just what I heard earlier, 27 member states. I'm faced with 800 cities, or over 800 cities in Europe, that all have different regulations. So if you want to attract investment in Europe, some kind of harmonization of regulations need to be there. We say we are a single market, but we are not always a single market.
So something for the EU to work on to...
Exactly,
great.
yeah. And we are trying our best to do that because we are all, in 6 years' time, we only exist 6 years, we have built the largest innovation ecosystem in Europe when it comes to urban mobility, bringing university, research institutes, industry, and setting in the heart of the center the cities, because they are the enablers and the testbeds, providing the testbeds and the solutions. And then we can talk about the industry, we can talk about the cities. Let's not forget citizen engagement. They are the ones that need to adopt, accept new technology, new changes. Either is it new electric vehicles or is it autonomous vehicles at large, anyhow, it will happen, either forced by the industry.
And on the citizen engagement, we certainly saw that in the poll that that for now, they seem to be keen on combustion engine cars. Agnes, you've been to China, you've looked at the Chinese car industry. What's your take on are we focusing on an older technology by this effort to ensure freedom of choice when it comes to the future of what propels a car? Or does Europe need to be more aggressive to look to China as a model of both tech change in the car industry and then actually building it out in cities?
I don't feel the power of deciding what Europe should do, but at least I could see that China acted aggressively and acted early. And as a result, in major Chinese cities, not just the big ones on the eastern coast, but even in the middle of China, like in Sichuan province, in the city centers, only electric vehicles allowed to go in. Therefore, the noise that was there, the pollution that was there is slowly but surely disappearing.
So you noticed a sort of a
a
qualitative
big
difference between European
I've been
cities?
visiting China in the past 20 years, almost on a yearly basis, and there's a huge change in this regard, where Europe is certainly lagging behind.
Great. You'd also mentioned the issue of and I think this sort of comes through in the poll question, there's a lack of charging infrastructure in Europe, especially in some European countries as well. And I think that drives some of that fear of that, or that need to hang on to combustion engine cars, because there's the range anxiety, where I'm going to charge my car. Do you see that as a problem as well?
Yeah, I heard about a few positive examples, such as Belgium, Brussels, for instance, where there are lots of charging opportunities. But when it comes to Central and Eastern Europe, when it comes to Southern Europe, it's very difficult to find actually charging spots. And without that, people won't be buying EVs because they would have to face some difficulties in charging their vehicles.
Sandra, you were saying that in Estonia you've got huge numbers of charging stations, but very few electric cars. Why is that? What's going on there?
Well, I think it's mostly fear going over to new technologies. Yes, we have like 6 charging stations, 1 charging station for 6 cars. It's well above the usual what is expected or recommended to have. So the companies are ready to provide the service, but the people are not coming over. But I think it's mostly fair. If you look at combustion engines, how many stations do you have? Yep. You don't have a station in your home. You don't have a station in your backyard. You charge like weekly, bi-weekly, because most of the driving is done in cities. Yep. So you go to a normal petrol station, you charge your EV, you drive a whole week, and if you look where the charging stations are, they are in many more places than usual combustion engine or gas stations. So I think we need to explain that, and you can have a charging station, basically a fuel pump in your home, and charge basically free electricity during daytime if there's solar panels. So I think there are many, many advantages on EVs.
So do you think it's a communications issue that the governments and the EU should do a better job of explaining the advantages? Or is there something more fundamental that's kind of holding people back from making the jump?
In Estonian case, I think it's the whole ecosystem. If you look at the polls, what is the average support for green transition, going more environmental friendly solutions? It's the lowest in Europe. It's like 40% of people think we need to do it.
Even though it's a very tech-oriented society.
Yeah, I think it starts from there, that we don't think we need to do this transition, not only in EVs, but as a whole. And I think that's holding us back. So a lot to explain.
Thanks. Another thing that jumped out at me in the poll was, I guess unsurprisingly, a majority favored importing Chinese cars, which I guess if you look at the quality-price ratio, it makes economic sense. That's not great news for the European car industry. I think Chinese cars are getting close to 10% of new car sales, according to the latest figures. That seems to be something that would be quite a danger for the European car industry. Agnes, what's your thought on how the European car industry should respond to that Chinese challenge, or can it respond?
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, we often describe this process as China challenge, which sounds as if it was a pure external pressure, but actually we have some internal difficulties in scaling innovation, and that's another issue. And this duality is reflected quite well if you take the example of Chinese investments in the EV sector in Europe.
Because Hungary is a big player in that.
Hungary is a big player there, but not just Hungary, Spain as well, for instance. Right. So on the one hand, we have speed, we have capital, we have technology, which helps accelerating the green transition. But on the other hand, that creates certain dependencies in critical sectors, such as batteries or upstream technologies. So I would say that the real vulnerability lies in not who is manufacturing cars in Europe, but who controls technology, who controls raw materials, and who controls the ecosystem behind all these.
That's an interesting one, because you've got, I guess, a few decades ago, China was keen to attract European investment to gain the technology. Now you see European countries trying to attract Chinese investment to gain Chinese technology. I think your Prime Minister is on his way to Beijing to see if he can score some more Chinese deals. Do you see a danger of Europe essentially becoming a working shop for China, that the tech will be Chinese, there'll be some assembly plants in Europe, but that the core intellectual work of developing cars will move to China?
For me, one thing is clear. First, we have to be proud to be Europeans and what we achieve until today. Second, we are still leading in the world, the automotive sector, and we want to continue to lead this sector. Third, when we're looking to China, China is not it's not a democracy, a liberal democracy, and they are putting all the state aids and all the state budget to promote this sector. So they are doing, competence against us. So what we have to do, let's see, and let's ask what we have to do. So the first thing, it is the simplification. We have to reduce all the bureaucracy, all the burdens that they are putting a huge cost to all the sectors, not just the automotive sector. This we are now delivering in these first 2 years in this term. Second thing, very important, it is flexibility. Of course that we have to arrive to the climate change objectives, but to arrive there, don't put so much requires bureaucracies and costs. Put flexibility. Give flexibility to the industry. Third important point for EPP is the technological neutrality. To arrive there, each company, the sector, the economy, will choose all the innovation and the technological neutrality to arrive there. Fourth, for me, it's very important, a real single market. We are 27 countries, and we have a lot of burdens internally still in Europe. If we are cutting all these burdens, we are going to reduce all the costs for the companies, and we are going to be a competitive economy. But this, we need the governments, the prime ministers, that they believe to cut and to do a real single market. European Union, Parliament, Commission, EPP believe on that. And we put on the table the Industrial Accelerator Act. Second thing, the Regime 28. That means, for the people that they don't know, means that any company can register today a new company, And it's going to be a company in all 27 countries with the same legislation. It's going to be applied. So this means a real single market. We have to be strong internally to be strong externally. And then the fifth key issue, it is the trade agreements. Now we are doing the agreement in India, in Indonesia, Australia, Mercosur. What means 2.1 billions of consumers that we can sell and export our goods, in this case, the automotive sector. So we have the tools. But then we need prime ministers that they believe in these European tools to create our economy to growth, to give opportunities to the young people, because we have a huge talent. But we are expelling the talent out of Europe. And we have the talent, we have the universities. So come on, let's do it and believe in Europe.
So basically, looking, I guess, to the governments and to the EU to sort of change the rules of the game. Sandra, what's your view on, is the Industrial Accelerator Act, as Dolores mentioned, the tariffs against, not very high, but tariffs against Chinese EV imports, some Chinese EV imports. What else can the EU be doing to, I guess, protect and promote the car industry? Is there more that you're expecting from them?
Yeah, I think we need to look for the future that the car industry is not just an industry that's producing cars, but it's a tech companies, because we are already seeing now in Estonia in 2020, Volkswagen made their software development company just to be ready for the future. And if you look, Commission presented last year the autonomous or the auto industry action plan. We say that we need to develop AI softwares and we need to scale up. But it's only halfway because we are still talking about pilots, testing. We legalized testing in Estonia 10 years ago. We have done numerous tests over the decade. We need to scale up as service, and that is the bottleneck. We can have all the technology, we can have all the companies, we can already have a company in EU, but if we cannot scale up in Europe, we have 800 cities, 800 regulations. It is not the matching up to US and China, and we are seeing already today that Europe companies are partnering with US and Chinese companies because there is no technology available in Europe. So that is the bottleneck. We need to have a single market for scaling up services. And
are you talking
services
specifically self-driving tech or
Yeah, if you're talking about self-driving services for
right.
In cities, for example, we need to have common rules to be scaling up the same way in all the cities, because otherwise it's impossible to do it.
Well, generally, I think the EU follows UN rules and is much more conservative on self-driving tech than the Americans and the Chinese. So I think there's a regulatory issue there as well as to how to tackle that.
Yeah, even if we have all the technical rules and regulations the same, we can produce the cars that would drive the same in all of
right.
Europe, but we need to have services to provide, because I think the people will not start buying self-driving cars. It will come from the service side.
Mark, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, we should not always look from just one angle. And that was a bit of my introduction as well. I think, like autonomous vehicles and the introduction of autonomous vehicles, is it just a technology or is it a mode of transportation? No, it should be looked at as a holistic view on public transport and how it can fit into the mobility at large. So if we only look from the automotive perspective and protect the automotive sector and make it more competitive, maybe you come with good solutions, but it will not fix the issues where citizens in the cities face on a day-to-day basis. Maybe autonomous vehicles and autonomous solutions can finally also help us in all the pilots that we have done over time in demand-responsive transport. How do you make sure that people that are in need of mobility but don't have transportation, either due to poverty or due to disability or elderly people, all the demand-responsive transportation solutions and pilots that we have tested, they are not economically viable. Well, if autonomous technology could help into that, and if it can be a seamless first and last mile transportation into bus, metro, train network, that makes sense. So let's not only focus on automotive sector, let's not only focus on the technology sector. The core DNA, what we do within my entity, is bringing public and private sector together in the dialogue. And yes, that can be hard discussions, but at least you get sometimes the risk-avoiding element from public sector with the risk-taking element of the industry. That brings creative new solutions. To your point before, we must be proud of what we are able to do in Europe. We are good in research. We are good in innovation. We are really bad in scaling it up. And the 28th regime, it is a
quickly,
first
because our clock is clicking down. I'm just going to ask Agnes, Hungary has been a big recipient of Chinese investment and also has European investment in what's your assessment of which is providing more value to the Hungarian economy and to Hungarian R&D? Is it the Chinese companies or is it the Western ones, or is it a pretty good wash?
I would say neither, because they are bringing assembly, pure assembly activity. Both the Germans, both the Japanese and the Chinese. And here in Hungary, I would say that it's not a technological and industrial question, but more of an economic and social issue now, because it creates lots of environmental degradation and social tensions.
We're out of time, which is really too bad. I'm going to ask a very, very quick question, and I can't see most of you because I've got massive lights flashing straight into my eyes. But I'd like to ask, if we can get a show of hands, including the panelists, who owns a EV or a hybrid car? You put your hand up. It's not too bad. I have a diesel, so I'm going to keep my hands low. Second, final question before we leave. Would you buy a cheap and well-made Chinese car, or is that a total no-go for you? Yes.
Well, and Jan,
not too much.
Jan, the third question is, who doesn't own a car at all?
Oh, there you go. Okay. Thank you very much to all the panelists for a really good panel. And my colleague Kate Day will be coming up on stage right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.